Hello and welcome to another in the video series 12 Days of Painting. And all of these videos are just really simple paintings that you can do in just a few minutes with just 3 colors. They make great gifts for family and friends or for yourself. So let's get started. Today we're going to do a little landscape with a tiny little house. And you may be wondering what's going on with the surface of this canvas. I'm reusing a canvas that wasn't successful, so I just covered it with a couple of layers of titanium white, let that dry, and now I'm ready to do another painting right on top of it. So let's put our palette out. We're going to be using our standard 3 colors. This is all in your description: quinacridone magenta, phthalo blue, and benzimidazolone yellow. You could also use Hansa yellow. I'll put out some benzimidazolone yellow, a little phthalo blue, and some quinacridone magenta. We're also going to be using some titanium white. Put out a fair amount of that. And we'll be using some glazing liquid. This will keep our paint wet and workable. So there we go, we're all set. The 2 brushes that I'm using today are my 10 and my 6 Princeton brushes. Those are in your description as well. I'm going to start with my number 10, and I'm going to make a bright pink sky. So I'll get a little bit of quin magenta, a lot of a lot of titanium white, lots of that. And I'm just going to paint that right down. We're going to come quite a bit down with that. I'm a big fan of pink skies. Love pink skies. Let's give it a little bit of variety. Just let that quin magenta go right into the canvas. I'm going to wipe my brush, get a little titanium white, just so it's not too static. There we go. Get some nice interest going there. I'm just using a horizontal paint stroke. Okay, that looks pretty good. Okay, for our first hill, we're doing a little landscape here. So for our first hill, I want a nice kind of warm orangey red. I've got pink on my paintbrush. I'm just going to wipe most of that off, not going in the water. I'm going to go to the yellow, get a little quin magenta, get a nice orange going. I want it a little darker than that. There we go. I want it to be in contrast to that pink sky. I want it to be warm. Let's get a little bit warmer than that. And I'm going to add a little titanium white to it. Not much, but a little bit. When you're working with these pigments, these are all transparent pigments. And so a lot of times if you mix these transparent pigments together and put them down over another color, they won't cover because they're transparent. So I always like to add a little bit of titanium white just to make sure. So I'm going to have a little bit of a rolling hill here. There we go. Wipe my brush. And I think I'm going to pick up a little more of that Hansa. Let's go a little darker. There we go. That looks pretty good. Okay, wipe my brush. And in the foreground, I'm going to have green hills. Now I've got this red-orange on my brush, but I'm going to go ahead and make green with it because just having this red-orange on my brush is going to give the green that I make a little bit of a muted color. So I'm going to pull my yellow down here, grab a little bit of blue, not much. That phthalo is really strong. Now I've got this bright green. It's too bright. So I'm going to go back and pick up some of that orange that I made. That's a good green right there. It's kind of muted, kind of brown. Let's put a little bit more yellow into it. There we go. That's a nice muted green. It'll play off nicely against that orange. I'm going to put just a tiny bit of titanium white into it, not much. There we go. That's going to look really good. Look at that. Beautiful. Now, one thing that's happening here is this is not covering because it's got too many of the transparent pigments in it. So I'm going to go back to my titanium white, a little more blue, a little more yellow, and let's get that a little more opaque. You see how much better that covers? Much better. Okay, now we've got our two hills. And this time we are going to have a road that goes back to the back and a little house back there, just to kind of give it a sense of depth. But we have to get everything dry before we do that. And I think we're going to have one more hill in the foreground because we want that road to roll over. So let's have one more hill in the foreground. That's going to have a light yellow hill. I'm going to get some yellow, grab some white, kind of muddy it up a little bit with that green, and let's have that hill right here. A little bit more white so it'll really have some contrast. There we go. Now we've got three distinctive hills going on, and that's what we need. Now, if you have been following along in these videos, you know what's going to happen next. You're going to pause the video for about 5 minutes. Let this dry, put it in front of a fan, or if you want to use a hairdryer, go ahead, but use a cool setting on the hairdryer. Come back in 5 minutes and we'll continue on. Okay, we're back. We let that dry for about 5 minutes and now we're going to continue on. The next thing we're going to do is take our paint pens and draw a little house back here. So I'm using a fine point white paint pen. You could also do this with a paintbrush if you want, but I'm working on a pretty small canvas, so I think I'm going to use a paint pen. Just make sure it's not doing anything too strange, like making big blobs of paint, and make sure it's a little bit dry. And then I'm going to just draw a really simple little square back here. That's all. It's pretty tiny. And let that dry. Really small, because it's way off in the distance. So it's going to take some time to dry. So I'm just going to let that sit there while we go on and do other things. All right, that's our little house off in the distance. The next thing we're going to do is make our road going back to Grandma's house. So I think a really good way to do that would be to just sort of gesture where it's going to be, so that you have a good idea about how your road is going to look. So you want your road wider down here. It gets a little narrow here, and then it gets even more narrow here. So you can either do that with a paintbrush or a paint pen. I think I will start with a paint pen. And I'm going to use a yellow paint pen because my road is going to be yellow. So I'm going to start right here and draw the edges of my road in like so. Then when it gets over here, it's going to be more narrow, and it's going to be offset from that because roads go over these hills and make turns and things. So we're going to have it over here, and it's going to be a little more narrow right there. And then as it goes further out, it's going to be even more narrow. So it's going to be really narrow back here, like that. So it really looks like it's going off in the distance. Now that just gives you sort of the roadmap for your road. And it's always a good idea to kind of sketch that out. Now I really want that yellow to sit on top of these greens and the red, so I want to make sure I have titanium white in it. So I'm going to get a little yellow and a lot of titanium white. I'm going to make sure my brush has no water in it. And I'm going to pick up that. Let's make a little more of that, because I want to make sure I have enough. So make a little more of that. Don't think that has enough titanium white in it. We might even have to paint our road twice, but we'll see. Okay, let's paint our first part of our road here. It looks like we're probably going to have to paint it twice, but that's okay. And you don't want the edge of the road to absolutely meet the hill. It should come over it just a little bit. And that might be a tiny bit too much. I'm just going to push that back with my finger. Okay, now let's do our other one. Same thing. Just paint that in. And once again, I think we're going to have to do 2 layers because we're covering a darker layer with a lighter color. So I want to make sure it's nice and solid. Okay, and finally back here, this one's going to be really narrow, so it may just be a paint stroke back there. And that's why I like these brushes so much. They really do behave. They do exactly what you tell them to do. So there we go. Now our road really looks like it goes way back in the distance where our teeny weeny house is. I'm going to put a little bit more down on top of this. It probably should be dry by now. And a little bit more on this one. And even though these are not solid, a solid layer of paint, it's kind of nice that they have a little bit of variation in them, because otherwise our road would look really flat. It would look like it didn't belong on the painting. Okay, so there's our road. Our road looks pretty good. Okay, our little house is dry back there. So what we want to do now is take just a teeny weeny bit of Quin Magenta on our brush, tiny bit, and we just want to make the roof line. So what I like to do is hold my hand and brace it on my other hand. Sometimes I use my pinky finger to brace, but just make a triangle. That's all you have to do. It's just a little triangle. And it's so tiny back there that you really don't have to worry too much about it if it's not perfect. Super tiny. Now, while that's drying, we're going to paint a couple of trees. And they're going to be pretty tiny too. So here is our phthalo blue, little phthalo blue here, way too much. Yellow, make a nice green, and then let's make it almost black. We're going to put a little Quin Magenta into it, a little more. There we go. So it's a really dark greeny black. Clean your brush, get a nice point to your brush, make sure it's nice and clean, and then we'll just have a couple of little trees back here, really tiny. And in most of the videos, what I tell you is to just make little dots for the trees. These are going to be so small you might not even need to make dots. Really small little lines here. Like that, those teeny weeny trees. We're going to flesh them out just a little bit. Not much, they're pretty tiny. Okay, they're way off in the distance. Now finally, our little white house should be dry, so we're going to make one more tree on top of the house. That's why we do the house first. So the tree comes over the house like so. There we go. Super tiny. Okay, now comes the fun part. Let's do some flowers and whatnot on the edges of our hills. I'm going to take my number 6, get some hands of yellow down here in this green that I was making, and just come along the top of that. Let's get that a little lighter. Let's put a little titanium white into it. Just come along the top of that. I'm just dabbing with my brush. And if you've been watching these videos, you can see from the side, I'm just dabbing with my brush. Little tiny growing things. Let's get a little titanium white there. You just want some variation. You want contrast in the greens. A little darker, a little lighter along the top there. Let's go a little bit more yellow. A little bit of yellow in there. Maybe even a little bit darker over here. That couldn't hurt, right? Let's have a little titanium white. Just so you have that little grassy stuff along the top of your hill there. And as we come forward, they're going to be a little bit bigger. So a little more of my yellow. I'm going to come here and I'm going to pull down like so. Let's go a little bit darker. Put a little more quin magenta in that. And a little bit more yellow. And you can see that I'm just making a bunch of different greens and browns down here. Okay, let's have a little more yellow right here. All right, now let's put a few little blossoms on top of our plants that we have there. All right, now you don't need much on top of the little plants that we've got growing there. So to do that, I'm going to use a flat brush and I'm going to go into the titanium white and the quin magenta and make a pink. And then I'm just going to tap. And if you look at that on the side, I'm just using the flat part of my brush and tap. Let's have a little few white ones. Tap off that most of that paint. You don't want a lot of paint. And we end up with a few little growing things there beside the road. Okay, once again, these are very simple little paintings that you can do in, what was that, 20 minutes? And of course you can make them more elaborate if you want to, but I'm trying to keep these videos just to 20 minutes or so. And you know something, when you make something handmade and give it as a gift, it's the best kind of gift there is. Hope you enjoyed that. Remember to check me out in the rest of the 12 Days of Painting videos. And remember what I always say, keep painting.